Sup everyone, Thomas here, aka Restream's Trainer, and welcome back to another one of my videos. So evolution is undoubtedly one of the most important aspects of the Pokémon games. It's how most Pokémon become stronger and gain access to new moves and abilities. Yet how a Pokémon evolves isn't always obvious. Some are as simple as leveling up enough, but then some are as bizarre and complicated as giving a Pokémon a particular item and spinning for 5 to 7 seconds. So needless to say that there's some weird methods for evolving some Pokémon, and my goal with this video is to go over all of them, from the simple to the unique. Now I'll only be covering the mainline games for obvious reasons, and for those watching this video in the future, this video is coming out with ZA and the Mega Dimensions DLC being the latest mainline release. I may choose to remake this video in the future when more games have come out, but that's a future me to deal with. Now before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps this channel out, as I'm hoping to reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. But with all that said, let's get started. Let's start with the most simple method, simply leveling up. Once a Pokemon reaches a certain level, it evolves. That level can be as low as 7, or in the case of Hydreigon, as high as 64, which to this day remains the highest level evolution in the series. Now there's a lot of Pokemon that evolve this way, though there's also plenty that have an extra condition or two. Probably the most common of these are Pokemon that evolve when leveled up with a high friendship. Friendship evolutions are usually a pain in the arse, since raising friendship can be a hassle at times, and it's hard to tell if a Pokemon's friendship is high enough to evolve most of the time. And as someone who's currently in the middle of a platinum playthrough with 3 different friendship evolutions, I'm having some regrets. Now to add on to this, some friendship evolutions have the additional requirement of being done during a certain time of day. And while we're on the topic, time-based evolutions. There are a few Pokemon that require it to be either day or night in order to evolve. Now some simply need to be a certain level, and I've already mentioned friendship evolutions. But another method is Pokemon that evolve by leveling up while holding a certain item. And I bring it up here because every single one also requires a certain time of day. These ones usually aren't too bad. A slightly different evolution method is for a Pokemon to level up while knowing a certain move. A fair few of the moves in question need to be learned via Move Reminder, though some can be taught via TMs, and some actually learn them naturally through level up. Now a slightly more bizarre and somewhat forgotten method of evolution is location-based evolution, where a Pokemon has to level up when in a certain area. Now I imagine that a lot of newer Pokemon players weren't aware that this was a thing, and that's largely because it's been effectively scrapped in the newer games, with all the relevant evolutions being replaced with stone evolutions. Now some games like Legends Arceus and BDSP do still have the original method, but it's basically non-existent nowadays. But to go over them, Glaceon requires you to be near an ice rock, while Leafeon is near a moss rock. Crabominable is on Mount Nanakila, while Magnezone, Probopass and Vikavolt are in what's known as a special magnetic field. Each game between Gen 4 and 7, plus Legends Arceus, has an area designated as one. Those areas are Mount Coronet in Sinnoh, or the Coronet Highlands in Hisui, Chargestone Cave in Unova, Route 13 in Kalos, New Moorville in Hoenn, and Alola technically has 2. In Sun and Moon, it was Vast Pony Canyon, but because waiting until the final island to finally evolve your Charjabug into Vikavolt is quite frankly ridiculous, in Ultra Sun and Moon, they changed it to Bludgeon Mountain, which still seems a bit far into the game to get Vikavolt, but it's an improvement. Now this next one only applies to regional variants, but I feel it's worth bringing up. Region-based evolutions, where a Pokemon's evolution is determined by what region you're currently in, or more accurately, whether they become a regional variant or not. Take Coughing for example. In just about every game it's in, it just needs to be level 35 to evolve into Wheezing. But if you're in Galar, then it evolves into Galarian Wheezing, and all relevant regional variants have the same requirements as their regular counterparts. Another weird one is game-based evolution, where Pokemon's evolution is based on what game you're playing. Now this only really applies to 2 Pokemon, Rockruff and Cosmoem. With Rockruff, whether or not it becomes midday or midnight Lycanroc is entirely based on whether you're playing Sun or Moon. However, this is no longer the case in the modern games, and now it's largely based on time of day. With Cosmoem on the other hand, while its evolution into Solgaleo or Lunala is also based on Sun and Moon, this one actually still persists in Gen 8 and 9, with Solgaleo being in Sword and Scarlet, and Lunala being in Shield and Violet. A slightly more common evolution method is gender-based evolution, where Pokemon's evolution is based on its gender. This comes in two forms. The first is Pokemon like Combee and Salandit, where only females evolve. And the second is Pokemon like Burmy, where both genders can evolve, but evolve into different Pokemon. In this case, males become Mothim, and females become Wormadam. The last method I'll discuss in this section is Pokemon that evolve with the Let's Go feature in Scarlet and Violet. Simply take your Pokemon out for a stroll, take at least 1000 steps, and then level it up. There's only 3 Pokemon that evolve this way, and I'm curious to see how they'll handle this in the future, whether they bring the feature back, or change how the Pokemon evolve. Now there are technically still a few Pokemon that have leveling up as a requirement, but a lot of them are one-offs that I'll save for later when I cover all the really bizarre methods. Now for the next main category, items. Having a Pokemon evolve by using an item. Now the most common method here are evolution stones, of which there are 10. Fire, water, electric, leaf, ice, sun, moon, shiny, dusk, and dawn. And it's worth mentioning that some of these Pokemon have the added requirement of needing to be a certain gender, or being in a certain region in the case of regional variants. The rest of the Pokemon in this category each have a unique item, though they aren't usually too much of a hassle. Galarian Slowpoke evolves into Galarian Slowbro with the Galarica Cuff, or Galarian Slowking with the Galarica Wreath. Applin requires a tart apple to evolve into Flapple, a sweet apple for Appleton, and a syrupy apple for Diplin. Poltegeist requires either a cracked or chipped pot, depending on whether or not it's antique. Cubfu evolves into Urshifu when exposed to either the Scroll of Darkness or the Scroll of Waters. Now I should clarify that the scrolls are only items in Scarlet and Violet. In the Isle of Armor DLC, they're interactable items located in the Towers of Two Fists. Scyther evolves into Cleavor with Black Orgerat. Ursaring evolves into Ursaluna with a Peat Block, but there's also the added requirement that it has to be during a full moon, so good luck. Charcadet evolves into Armarouge with the Auspicious Armor, and Ceruledge with the Malicious Armor. Poltergeist, similar to Poltergeist, evolves with either the Unremarkable or Masterpiece Teacup, depending on whether or not it's Artisan. And Duraludon evolves into Archaludon with the Metal Alloy. Now for the next category, the bane of introverts everywhere, trading. Yeah, some Pokemon only evolve when traded to another player, though there is technically an alternative. The Linking Cord. This is an item that evolves trade Pokemon without having to actually trade them, which is great. The problem? It was introduced in Legends Arceus, and has so far stayed in Legends Arceus. Yeah, annoyingly they haven't brought it back yet, not even in ZA. But for some Pokemon, simply trading isn't enough. They need to hold a certain item while being traded, like a Metal Coat for example. But if that's not weird enough, how about this? Shelmet and Carablast. These two require being traded to evolve. More specifically, traded with each other. Yeah, seriously. And I think now would be a good time to move on to our final category, the Bizarre. Now about half of these technically fit into the level up category, but I feel they work better here. Let's start with Sylveon. Now how many of you remember Pokemon and Me? This was a feature in Gen 6 and the number after 6 where you could interact with your Pokemon and raise their affection. and in order to evolve an Eevee into Sylveon, there are two requirements. The first is for Eevee to know any fairy type move, most likely Baby Doll Eyes. And the second is for Eevee to have at least 2 levels of affection. Now in Gen 8 onwards, they changed it to simply being High Friendship, with the fairy move requirement making sure you get Sylveon and not Umbreon or Espeon. Next is Mantyke, and the requirement here is for Mantyke to level up while you have a Remoraid in your party. Next up is Feebas. Now from Gen 5 onwards, Feebas evolves when traded with the Prism Scale, but prior to that, it had a much more annoying method, the Beauty Stat. In Gens 3 and 4, there were contests you could do. Now I doubt any sane person actually does these, so feel free to correct me in the comments. But anyway, in those games, in addition to a Pokemon's regular stats, there are also contest stats, and the important one here is the Beauty Stat. Now if you're desperate or bored enough to try evolving Feebas this way, I'll let you look up how to raise the stat on your own. But the important thing is that in order for Feebas to evolve, it needs to have a Beauty Stat of at least 170. So good luck. Now an interesting one is Nincada, since technically the only requirement is to reach level 20 to get Ninjask. But if you have an empty slot in your party, you also get Shedinja. Though from Gen 4 onwards, you also need to have a spare Pokeball in your bag as well. Pancham is up next, and the requirement here is to reach level 32 while having a Dark type in your party. Now for a rather infamous one, Inkay. In order to evolve Inkay, you need to reach level 30 while holding your console upside down. Yes, really. You need to physically hold your 3DS or Switch upside down. And it's important to mention that you need to play in handheld mode with the Switch. Flipping your controller upside down won't work. A significantly more sane method is with Sliggoo, which evolves into Goodra at level 50, but only if it's raining. Now for another weird one, Finizen. Now the requirement here is to reach level 38, but it has to be while you're in a union circle, so I hope you have friends. Next up is Bisharp. In order to evolve Bisharp, you need to make sure it's holding a Leader's Crest, and then you need to have Bisharp defeat 3 other Bisharp who are also holding a Leader's Crest. Now how do you tell if a Bisharp has a Leader's Crest? It's actually quite simple. A Bisharp with a Leader's Crest will have a group of Pawniards surrounding it, since, you know, it's a leader. While certainly a unique method, it surprisingly isn't too big of a hassle. Now for Gimmighoul, and for this, you'll need to collect 999 Gimmighoul coins from around the map, at which point you should be able to evolve it into Golden Go. Alright, last one of the level ups, Tyrogue. Now the requirement for Tyrogue is to simply reach level 20, but what it evolves into is where it gets interesting. See, Tyrogue's evolution is based on its stats, more specifically, attack and defense. If its attack is higher than its defense, you get Hitmonlee, and vice versa for Hitmonchan. But if attack and defense are equal, then you get Hitmontop. Certainly a creative method. Now for the methods that aren't tied to levels, starting with Galarian Farfetch'd, which evolves into Sirfetch'd when it's able to land 3 crits in a single battle, which is made easier if you give it the legs to hold and use moves with an increased crit rate. And now for what I, and I'm sure many others, would consider the most bizarre evolution method in the series so far, Galarian Yamask. To start off with, you need Yamask to lose at least 49 HP without fainting, and then walk under this specific arc in Galar, or this specific bridge in Lumiose, which is just really weird. Like genuinely, who thought of this? Next up is Milcery. In order to evolve her, you need to give her a sweet and spin your character around, and the design of Alchemy you get is based on what sweet you give her, how long you spin for, what direction you spin, and even the time of day. Unless it's shiny, then none of that matters. Stantler is next, and to evolve it into Weird Ear, you need to use the move Side Shield Bash 20 times in Agile style. So as you can imagine, this only works in Legends Arceus. Similar to this is Sicilian Quillfish, which evolves into Overquill after it's used the move Barbarage 20 times, this time in Strong style. But because this only works in Legends Arceus, future games have changed it slightly. In ZA, you simply need to land 20 hits with the move, without the Strong style requirement. And in Scarlet and Violet, it only needs to know the move and then level up to evolve. Next is White Stripe Basculin, which evolves into Basculegion after you take a total of 294 recoil damage. Now to be clear, you can heal Basculin, it just can't faint. Though in Scarlet and Violet, it also has the added requirement of needing to level up afterwards. And finally is Primeape's evolution into Annihilape. For this, you need to have Primeape use the move Rage Fist 20 times, and then level up. Seems fairly simple at this point. And with that, I've covered every mainline method of Pokemon evolution. Some simple, some annoying, and some bizarre. What did you guys think? What are some of your experiences with trying to evolve some of these Pokemon? Be sure to let me know down in the comments. And if I somehow missed one, be sure to let me know that too. But that's going to do it for me here. Don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps this channel out. And let me know if you have any video ideas you want to see me cover in the future. Have a great day everyone, and I'll see you next time. See ya!